Hi, David Hartmann here, and welcome to an acupuncture point combinations webinar that I have sort of had in my mind for a while now, ever since I've been to conferences and done my own workshops on my new book. This one here, a lot of people tend to have questions that are the same. And so in this little presentation, what I want to do is go through those questions, but I also just want to make sure that people are aware of the dynamics of point combinations and also to fill in a couple of other bits and pieces in there as well. So for just over an hour or so, we're just going to go through this and hopefully it'll help answer a lot of questions that you have. Might even give you better understanding of point combinations, which can only be a good thing in my mind. So I'll just get that up. There we go. Okay, so acupuncture point combinations, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And the quote, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, actually has been around for a long time. A philosopher called Aristotle, which I'm sure you've all heard of, coined it a couple of thousand years ago. A friend of mine, Lorne Brown, actually used it when he wrote about, put a little reference in for my book. And it just ties in so perfectly, because the idea of it is that one point can do a lot of things. And if you're just picking random points to do lots of jobs, you might find that they're not really achieving what it could. But if you do a point combination, the whole of that treatment will target the things that you're designing it for. And so in a sense, that whole treatment is better than just the individual components themselves. And so, as I said, I do like this quote. Thank you, Lorne, for that one. So this recording is across 6 parts, but obviously with it only going for a little over an hour, some stuff will be touched on, and each part has different amounts of time spent on them as well. So in each part, this is done again as we get to each part. But as you can see with part 1, it's just basically introducing myself, introducing this recording, some of the questions that I am asked that are the most common, talk about the textbook quickly, and just talk about how constructing point combinations is quite a difficult thing in itself if you don't sort of have the experience within that acupuncture set, I guess. Part 2 is understanding the point combinations a little bit more, why it matters, the dynamic movement of the vital substances that we access when we do acupuncture, the stagnations, the stasis, accumulations, these types of things that we might be aware of or unaware of in the body, what happens if we stack points all in the one place, and then how these point combinations work. Now that is covered a little bit in the first couple of chapters of this book, and so we won't spend a lot of time on it in case you already own the book. We talk about local, adjacent, distal point combinations, possible shapes, treating the person, not the disease, and also this idea of being a chef or a cook, which I really liked in regards to understanding point combinations a little bit more as well. And a gentleman called Bo Mannix that is one of the bosses at Endeavour College. He is the first person that I saw that coined that phrase in a subject, and I really liked it. Part 3 is having a quick look at the different ways that you could combine your point combinations. So you obviously got Zàng Fü patterns that'll do it for you, 5 elements. Maybe it's a musculoskeletal complaint. The Shanghan Lun, 6 divisions, 4 levels. You might have gone to the Dr. Tan or Master Tung workshops over the last few years, and you find them to be quite helpful within constructing point combinations. There's also, of course, you can choose the Ben or Biao, so the root or manifestation, and there's countless others as well. So we'll look at a few of those. Then I just want to talk quickly about how I actually construct the point combinations. And this, again, helps to answer some of the questions that people have for me. So we'll look at those in more detail, but basically it comes down to the patient giving me a main complaint. That gives me some points that pop into my head. Then they give me the accompanying signs and symptoms, more points pop into my head. Zàng Fü Diagnosis, same thing. And then I look for point connections within my list of points that have been bumbling around in my head. Look at how those needles, where they're located, whether that's for me a sensible scattering of needles or whether it's too stacked. This is what we look at. I look at the number of needles that I'm tending to use. Am I going to go bilateral, unilateral? How I position my patient? Do I have a particular order that I needle the points? And then how long I need to leave the needles in for? I write the needle number down, and then we'll talk about this, what I explain to the patient. And then I just wanted to spend a little bit of time, just a little bit, just talking about what my favorite channel is and why, and my favorite list of points. Again, some of this stuff, not a lot of it, but some of it is in the book. We have a quick review of good versus bad point combinations. It's not exhaustive. There is a lot more info in my book with that theme. And then just some contact details if you want to get a hold of me. Any online courses that I currently have, and that's growing all the time. I'm looking at doing some weekly video posts towards the end of 2020, and then also some monthly online chats as well that I want to tie in with those weekly posts. So we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. All right, so let's get into it. So part one, again, as I said, that's all what we've already talked about. So we'll move through into this. So for those of you that do know a little bit about me, apologies for the quick rehash. Basically speaking, almost straight out of school, I went into acupuncture. I did, after graduating school, spend a year in the hospitality industry and realized that really wasn't what I wanted to do. And then I found the acupuncture course in Brisbane and started studying it and just have loved it ever since. And I started studying in 1993. So I've been doing it for quite some time now. And I've never been one that's wanted to just sit still. And I mean, in Australia, you can't anyway. There are continuing professional development points that you have to accrue each year. And so you are, for want of a better way of describing it, almost forced to continually learn. And I mean, I do that anyway. So it was never going to be an issue. And I tend to find themes that interest me and I explore those more, particularly themes that we don't really have time to discuss in the 4-year full-time course that we have at Endeavour College of Natural Health, where I teach. So there'll be, you might think that you can cover a lot of stuff in 4 years, and you certainly can, but we're looking at, basically 2,500 years of content that we're trying to pack into 4 years. So there will be certain things that are only really touched on. And for me, they're often the things that I like to explore more and blow that right out until it becomes something that I understand more, clinically incorporate it. If I feel like it's interesting enough, it then becomes a course or a workshop or a webinar. And so that's kind of how I sort of go about things. I do have a special interest in heart, Shen, and emotion-based conditions. And in previous decades, I've had similar with musculoskeletal, headaches/migraines, that sort of thing. So as I explore those interests, it gives me additional looks into what's happened, different ways that you can look at treating people. And that's really interesting to me. Because I wrote this book, it's been a bit of a funny thing with the students of mine and some of my acupuncture friends. I've now been being referred to as the point combo dude because of the fact that I have this interest in acupuncture point combinations. And that's not very academic sounding, but I kind of like it, as opposed to being like Dr. Dave or whatever. I actually really like that kind of point combo dude. It makes me more approachable, I reckon, in some ways. But yeah. So some of you obviously do know me, certainly in Australia, and I'm starting to be known more around the world as I go to more and more conferences and present there, and also do my workshops in and around those conferences. So the bio that you may or may not have read, I think it's about a dozen different countries I've been to now and presented at. And it's been really interesting. I've met a lot of wonderful people, and hopefully over the coming years, as sort of COVID dissipates, then I'll be able to continue that into the future. So the most common questions that I am asked at these conferences and my workshops is why I use the number of needles I use. And you'll see later on in this webinar that I use roughly between 8 to 16 needles. Now, I will talk about that a bit more later, so I'm going to skip over that one, but that's one of the ones that I'm asked. Another one is how I designed the point combinations. Now, a lot of the point combinations I use weren't my design. They were designed by lecturers when I studied. I had a lot of really wonderful lecturers that taught me over 20 years ago and are still teaching me. One of those in particular was John McDonald, or Johnny Mac. He gave me a lot of interesting point combinations within his classes, and also when he does those live workshops, or even his recorded workshops, he gives a lot of point combinations in there. And he's very, very historical. He knows a lot of the ancient texts. He knows a lot of information of sort of history of Chinese medicine. He teaches that subject. And so historically, he's offering up point combinations or groups of points, maybe not an entire treatment, but groups of points that are things that he spotted from books from 1,000 odd years ago. So very much trust his knowledge base. But there's a lot of other lecturers that I had that did likewise. Obviously, books give you point combinations. Every single book that talks about acupuncture points will tend to have point combinations in them. And so I use those ideas as well. Clinical experience is a big one. I think it's my 28th year now. So having 28th year treating patients from student clinic through to now. And just looking at how those points work and merging them. And then obviously any and all of those things sort of merge together to look at similar themes, look for consistency, and then try those out in clinic, as I said. So it may start out as someone else's point combination that has been evolved by me over a period of years. That's now become the combination that you will see a lot in this book, and also in my other one, which we'll talk about at the end. Sorry about the lights shining off the book there. I get asked, do I tonify, sedate, or regulate the needles when I put them in? Sometimes. And obviously there are different ways that you can tonify, sedate, regulate, depending on how you lift and thrust or twist the needle or a variation of those things. I tend to rely on the point combination tonifying for me, or sedating for me, or regulating or balancing for me. And that's because of that design, the knowledge I have of what the points are doing together. And so that tends to be my approach more often than not. And in terms of what order I needle the points, we'll talk about that more a little bit later. I don't tend to have any particular order unless I'm doing the 8 extraordinary vessels, and then I do. And we will talk about that a little bit later on as well. So the textbook itself, you can see it's quite thick and over 150,000 words. And basically the design of it is that from my 28 years of treating patients and constantly studying, first the original acupuncture degree, then into a master's degree, and then writing 2 books and obviously clinical experience, and constantly writing content for my own workshops and for journals. I want to be able to help people, if they feel compelled to to look at the point combinations they use and see if they could be doing something a little bit better. So this is designed to make you look at the point combinations you use and improve on that. So that by the time you've read the book, what it's doing is it's prompting you to be a better acupuncture version of yourself, so that you get better results for your patients. That's pretty much the design of it. It's not just giving you answers. It's got plenty of stuff in there that you can use straight away in clinic tomorrow, but it also helps to teach you about what you do and how you could improve that. And I think that's kind of what I really wanted to achieve, is that I didn't want people to read the book and then go, I need the book all the time to refer back to it. I don't want people to become mini versions of me after they've read the book, in the same way I don't want students to graduate having had me as one of their lecturers and then they want to be mini versions of me. I want people to be their own special acupuncturist. And so that's really what I wanted, was to help people to become better acupuncture versions of themselves through the process of reading that book. Now, some acupuncture textbooks, you tend to pick chapters when you buy it and you read those, or you find little interesting bits throughout the book. And that's certainly fine for this as well. It's also a book that can very easily be read from front to back as it progresses you through the process. So I do have sample chapters of the book. And if you are interested in that, I have my email address at the back of this workshop, and you can email me and I'll send you a sample chapter of the book so you can see a bit more about what the design of it is and how it works. Now, my head's in the way there. But anyway, it's a quote from John McDonald, the foreword that he wrote for me. And it says, there are two vital process steps with which I have seen many students struggle. The first is transforming a list of signs and symptoms and clinical observations into a traditional Chinese medicine pattern differentiation or other diagnostic conclusion. The second is constructing the most appropriate acupuncture point combination to address the specific health needs of the presenting patient. So it's twofold there, according to Johnny Mack. Basically, the first is that you come up with the right diagnosis in whatever diagnostic tool you use. And the second is then taking that diagnosis and being able to construct the best possible point combination for that. And couldn't agree more. They are difficult processes. And to start with, we probably tend to come as close as we can to a diagnosis, and then we probably hit the books to find out what was the best combination and using those. And we might not be prompted to want to explore different point combinations until our patients don't respond how we would like them to. And so, again, the idea is that you want to be able to expand on that. I don't personally think that you should only really have about 50 points in your toolkit. If you look at points bilaterally, you've got over 1,000 points in the body. So 1,000 spots over that you can needle in the body. And that obviously includes your main channels, but also your extra points. And you could just randomly stab a point almost anywhere in the body, and you could argue that it will have an effect on the patient, good or bad. So you got a lot of spots, and I really like the idea that you want to learn more points, that you're not just sticking to a few, that you have a bigger list of points that you can use for patients. Because sometimes we're missing out on some absolutely brilliant points that we're not even aware of that could be helping our patient. So that's something that I'm very interested in as well. Okay, part 2 is looking at understanding the point combinations. Let's have a quick drink. So again, if you've got my book and you've read this chapter, this hopefully is a good rehash for you and just consolidates your learning. And if you don't have my book yet or you haven't read this chapter, then this will be potentially new content for you. So I'm sure that first line is not surprising at all. Patients are complex. Sometimes they're really, really easy to diagnose. Then that feeds into a nice, easy list of points that you want to use, and the patient gets better really fast. So that's a dream outcome. The reality is that certainly from my clinical experience, you don't get that a lot. Just last week at Endeavour College at the student clinic that I supervise some of the days, I think we had in across about 10 patients. In the week, we had 4 that were extremely complex. Really, really hard to nut out exactly what was going on. And for students, that can be quite overwhelming. Even if you're a student that's graduating in a few weeks' time, that's a situation that can really throw people. And so for me, because patients are complex, we really need to try and be as accurate as we can with the point combinations that we choose to really help the patient on their journey. And so because they don't fit into a nice, easy diagnosis, again, we can't always just go, right, liver qi stagnation, liver 3, peri 6, gallbladder 34, liver 14. Boom, we've got a little combination and away we go. It might be liver qi stagnation with spleen qi deficiency. And then you start going, okay, liver 3, gallbladder 34, for the liver qi stag, but then we've got spleen 3, spleen 6, stomach 36 for the spleen qi deficiency. And then we go, right, that all sounds good. It's 10 needles. I don't mind that number. Let's do it. They're all solid points. And then you start needling and you go, oh, every single point that I've needled is below the knee. Yes, they're spread out from the knee down to the feet, but there's no other points anywhere else. So then you might go, oh, well, you did say peri 6 about 30 seconds ago, David. Sure, yep. And that's on the arm. So that's spreading the energy out. You also mentioned liver 14. Sure, that's up on the trunk. Again, that would be spreading the energy out. And then you had liver 3 on the foot and liver 14 on the trunk. That's really moving the energy through the one channel. So you could go a step further and potentially look at doing something like that with the spleen qi deficiency. And whilst you might not have a spleen point higher up on the trunk, you might have a connection still with the qi deficiency and still will help with the spleen qi deficiency. And that could be, say, Ren 12, which is the front move point of the stomach, which is the yang buddy of the spleen. And it's a very good point to regulate digestion, which of course is where we get our qi produced in its, I guess, from food and drink, and then it moves around the body to create various other forms of qi and blood and so on. So it's an important point. And then if we had stomach 36 and Ren 12, you had the front mu of the stomach and the lower Herc of the stomach. So you're getting a stomach spleen connection there as well. So all of a sudden now we've got points that are more sensibly scattered, but now do we have too many? Because now we've added in peri 6, Ren 12, liver 14. That's another 5. So we're up to now 15. Not necessarily too many, depends on how many needles you use. Or you might go, that's too many. And so my advice there would be maybe get rid of something in the feet because you've already got enough in the feet and the legs. If you've already got 10 needles in the feet and the legs, then maybe take out one of those. If it's bilaterally needled, then that would drop the needle number down to 13, for example. So that's an option. And that feeds into that second thing. What do you do then? So I just gave an example of what happens if the diagnosis isn't easy. And how you choose points when patients are complex, again, same sort of thing. And again, I guess it comes down to your opinion of how many needles you use. I just gave an example of bilateral needling. If you did unilateral needling, then you've got a lot less there, obviously. and then ultimately going, well, the patient came in with something that they wanted treated, a main complaint. So do you mainly target the main complaint, which feeds into your diagnosis, which feeds into your list of points that you use, or do you try to cover something else? Maybe the main complaint is a new thing, so it's more a manifestation or a biao, and you've been able to isolate the ban or root cause, so you might want to target it because it will, as a result of treating the root cause, take care of the manifestations. So your point choices really come down to your experience and your the way that you would go about constructing a treatment for that, from that experience. Oops. We're looking at dynamic movement of vital substances. So of course, the vital substances are qi, blood, body fluids, and Xing. They move at different speeds. They often accumulate in different locations. They often move at different depths. And so what substance are we activating with our point combination? Again, that's going to come back to your diagnosis, of course. So if a person is kidney Xing deficient, for example, then you're probably going to focus a lot on tonifying Xing. But at the same time, you might also want to tonify qi, because qi, when it's strong, will feed in and help produce what they call post-heaven qi, which helps to nourish the Xing. So these might be processes that you look at. Or if a person is blood deficient, then you would want to tonify blood, and you might find that also tonifying qi, because blood is a form of qi. And so that might be another process. Or stagnations. If a person is qi stagnant, then we probably will choose points for the qi stagnation that would be different to someone that had a blood stasis or a phlegm accumulation. A phlegm accumulation is still a stagnation. So you might look at things like stomach 40, pericardium 5. Whereas if they're qi stagnant, you might look at pericardium 6 rather than pericardium 5, gallbladder 34 rather than stomach 40. If a person's got blood stasis, you might go with a spleen 10, for example, to move the blood. You've got so many different things that you can do. Bladder 17 for the blood as well. Lots of different choices. And there's points all over the body that you could use as well. So it's not like with someone with blood stasis, you've only got points in the legs or only in the arms or the trunk. You have points all over the body that you could use. And so once you know what substance you're activating, that should give you a list of points that pop into your head that you could conceivably use. Now, moving vital substances, and this is, again, this is not academic talk. I guess I like using words that really make sense to people. And I know that I could sound very, I could avoid using these types of words. I don't know. I don't know if it's just me. I don't know if it's the fact that I've been teaching students since 2000, whether my language has designed itself around trying to make it as simple sounding as possible, or whether it's just me. So apologies for the non-academic sounding terms here. In some regards, some of it, of course, is academic, but obviously flushing the extremities. Basically, what we're looking at doing there is getting the vital substances moving with power through the extremities, the legs, the arms, and the head. My dog is barking in the background. She can see me. Funny dog. So let's just remind you of that again. So extremities, legs, arms, head. So flushing the extremities is moving energy in and out of those extremities, which you want to do if there's stagnations in and around those extremities. You might want to nourish the organs. And so your focus might not be moving energy in and out of the extremities, more about moving energy in and out of the organs, the trunk, the sanjiao. You might want to sedate excesses. If that's the case, then you would have a series of acupuncture points you could use for that. Maybe you want to tonify deficiencies. Again, the processes are dependent on what's happening. If it's an excess and it's a stomach fire blazing, a lot of energy is traveling up the body. So it's moving up the trunk and into the head. So you probably want to sedate it by moving the energy down, and also use points that actually settle the stomach down as well, which of course is lower down. So you've got a variety of things you're doing there. Tonifying deficiencies tends to indicate that you want to move energy back to the organ that's deficient to make more of it, and to the organs that make qi as well. Another non-academic sounding, bash through stagnations. We want to force our way through stagnations. Sometimes we see the stagnations, sometimes we can't. Sometimes we can't see them, but we know they're there, like a scar that you can see on the surface, but you don't know how deep down that's really going. But we want to break that stagnation. Sometimes we can't see a stagnation, but it's there in terms of, say, a rheumatoid arthritis in the knee. You can't see any swelling there. Doesn't appear to be any redness. The patient is complaining of pain there. We've made the assumption there's stagnation in the knee, but we can't physically see it. Whereas, say, with an osteoarthritis of the knee, there's every chance the knee's all swollen. So we can physically see the stagnation. So either way, there's potentially a stagnation there, and we need to look at moving energy through it. And we may want to expel external pathogenic factors in our treatment design as well. And so we might want to push the pathogen out of the body and potentially strengthen that immune system, or strengthen your defensive qi at the same time. Or you may choose to do one or the other. There's chapters on that in a range of books, the processes at which you could do that, and then that designs your point combination. So we can construct point combinations for qi stag, blood stasis, body fluid accumulation. We've spoken about that. If it's not a phlegm accumulation, maybe it's a damp that's stagnating, so your points might change. And people have different views on this. For me, stomach 40 is more if it's a phlegmy, toxic, gluggy mess, almost a damp heat. Whereas damp accumulation, I may not use stomach 40. I may instead use spleen 3, spleen 6, spleen 9 as some points on the feet instead. That's just one example of how I might adjust my point combination. But of course, it's also dependent on where it is. If the damp accumulation is around the lower abdomen or in the thighs or the hips, there's still nothing wrong with spleen 3, spleen 6, spleen 9. But I might want to do some points around the accumulation locally, which might have me using points like Ren 12, liver 13, and points even closer again. Depends on what I want to do with the damp as well. Is the damp, how do I say this? Is there too much damp in the body? Or is there just too much damp in one spot, and therefore other spots are becoming too dry or too hot? So I'll just say that again. Is there too much damp in the body? They're eating too much damp producing foods. Maybe they live in a damp environment and they're just full of damp. In which case, the point combination you use might be more a diuretic type of treatment, where the damp is drained out of the body. You might find that the stools become a bit looser. If it's a female, the menstrual cycle might become a little bit more, more flow. Urination will increase. They might sweat more. It's acting as a diuretic. It's flushing the system to get rid of the damp excess. But sometimes damp, because it's heavy, tends to drop. And as it drops, you might find that as a result of where the fluid left, there's less fluid there now. So the area can dry out, or heat can start to accumulate. If that's the case, you might not want to get rid of the damp out of the body. You might actually want to redistribute the damp. So move the damp back up the body where it can moisten the dryness, or it can help to water on fire, help to put out the fire. So that's a potential design. And then that would mean that your points would probably change. So your point combinations would change as a result of what you're trying to do with that damp. So that's another example there. So you want to create free flow of vital substances at the end of the day, no matter what it is that you're trying to do. So stacking points in one area. I don't personally like doing that. You will see it written in a range of textbooks. You will have it taught to you at workshops, at conferences. If you do it and it works, great. I'm not telling you to change anything that's not working. I'd like you to change what's not working. I don't expect you to change things that work. If your treatments are spectacular and they're not the same as what I do, you don't need to change. I'd like to think that you would still look to see if you could be better, even better than what you are. Just because I've written a couple of books doesn't mean that I'm now all set and everything is going to stay the same now. I'm only 45 years old. I'm going to keep learning, keep growing. I'm going to always look to be the best acupuncture version of myself. It's never going to end. I think even at the point where I retire from treating patients, I'm probably still going to be producing workshops and books. I'm always going to learn. It's such a fascinating medicine. I feel like it would almost be disrespectful to not want to keep learning what our previous acupuncture ancestors have thrown out there for us to learn from. So from my personal experience, I don't like putting all my needles in the one place. As per the example I used about 10 minutes ago, where I'm not really going to just put all my needles below the knee, for example. I would prefer to have them sensibly scattered, and we'll talk about sensibly scattered a little bit later on. I just feel like if you put them all in the one place, it'll really get the energy moving, really jazz the energy up in that one place, but it won't necessarily solve all your problems, because what if there's a stagnation above where all your needles are stacked? So the osteoarthritis example that we gave before, even the rheumatoid arthritis in the knee, if all your points are below the knee, gets all the energy pumping away in the lower leg, and then it comes up the yin channels of the leg and hits the knee stagnation, and boing, boing, bounces off. It's not getting through. So it's got to fight to get its way through. In the same way, the energy that's coming down the leg can be restricted on getting down through the knee. So it's one kind of crude example of what, well, it's not crude, but it's a simple example. And, but that's one way of looking at what happens if you stack all your points in one area. There's a lot of stagnation that people have around the diami, that belt or girdle vessel, through fluid accumulation, weight increase around that lower abdomen, hip, thighs area. If everything, all your needles are below that space, you might find that there's a lot of restriction there. So having something above it and below it and even in it is my preferred approach. And sometimes we don't know where all the stagnations are. Spoke about that about 10 minutes ago, so we'll move on from that. So for me, I'm looking at using points sensibly scattered all over the body. Not always legs, arms, trunk, head. Sometimes legs and arms only, or sometimes arm and trunk only, sometimes trunk and leg only, sometimes head and legs only, that type of thing. It doesn't have to be every single place. And you'll see in the book, if you do have it, I have heaps and heaps of tables. Let me find an example here. You might not be able to see it very well, but just in that top corner, you'll see it'll actually have the point locations, whether they're head, face, trunk, front or back, arms, legs, arms, hands, legs or feet, have the list of the points and often the reasoning for why. So that tells you where the points are. I know that a lot of you will know where the points are, but it's just a nice little reminder to go, oh, okay, I can see what Dave's doing there. He's got points sensibly scattered through a range of different parts of the body. So basically what we're looking at is trying to make a point work better, stronger or faster. And so sometimes points have a lot of function, sometimes they don't have many at all. So this example is Lord Gen. So that's the point that's between the second and third knuckles, just proximal. So it is bilateral. It doesn't do a lot of things. It's a great distal point for stiff neck, and it does treat metacarpal, so it doesn't really do much else. So in this instance, because it doesn't have a lot of jobs, when you needle it, it probably knows what to do. But you can help it by doing other points that treat stiff neck as well, whether that be distal, like small intestine 3, lung 7, bladder 60, those types of points, or local, depending on where the neck tension is. You might have a gallbladder 20, a bladder 10, a bilow, do 14, depending on where the stiff neck is, or even some archie points. So that's helping the point work better towards its target, is my point. You can also enhance one particular function of a point and cancel or reduce its other functions. And in some ways you did that with that last example. If you're telling Lord Jan to treat the neck, it's not going to have very much impact on the metacarpals and the carpals. Spleen 6, though, does hundreds of things in the body. So it's nice to give it a target. Again, the body's not stupid and it will try to use points for the things that are wrong with it. But it's nice if you can give the body the information to help the process. So because it can do, say, yin deficiency, but it can also do damp accumulation, it'd be nice to give spleen 6 a bit of additional information to target, make it target specific. So that would be where you might do a combination that's in my book called the 3 yin 6s, spleen 6, heart 6, kidney 6. So there's 3 of them. They're all yin points and they all tonify yin and they're all number 6. Spleen 6, heart 6, kidney 6. You've got 4 needles in the legs and feet and 2 in the arms. But again, that might not be enough. But that's informing spleen 6 to be a yin tonic. But if we want it to do a damp accumulation, I gave the example a couple of minutes ago, don't use those points, but instead do spleen 3, spleen 6, spleen 9, and maybe Ren 12. So that's now telling spleen 6 we're treating damp, we're not doing yin deficiency. Or we might do that combination works on different aspects. So we do some points for damp heat together, we do some points just for damp, and some points just for heat. And so that scenario might play out with, say, a stomach 40 and a peri 5 for the damp heat together, or the points for damp, I just gave them, spleen 3, 6, 9, and some points just for heat, large intestine 11, Sanjiao 5, those types of things. So some will target individual things, some will target the whole thing. Now, I also like the idea of moving stagnations by working locally, distally, and adjacent. Because the local points work on the area that's impacted, and it'll try to generate movement in that space so that it moves in the space and then out from it. The distal points come from the outside and they come in and hit the edges and try to strip away the edges and work their way in. So one is generating and working on the inside to try and move the energy out of the space. The distal are trying to come at the edges and break it down so that the local move out, the distal move in, so that they merge and meet each other. And then adjacent are kind of in and around the stagnation. And so they work in harmony with both the local and the distal. And I feel like that's a much more effective treatment than only doing local or only doing distal. You don't always do local points. There are going to be certain acute or chronic musculoskeletal conditions, for example, where you don't do local. If someone's got a really problematic heart from a Western perspective, you may not do local. Even though you have good points on the front and the back, you may not actually physically put needles in around the heart itself. So sometimes you don't, but a lot of the time you can. And when you can, I'm a big fan of doing it. Now, the Master Tung and Dr. Tan stuff has really shown over the years that you don't always have to do local and you still get amazing results anyway. So that's something to consider. And I'm, if that's what works for you, then that's great. Again, if what you do works, then you don't have to change it. But for me, I like that idea. Local works inside out, distal works outside in, and the adjacent points work with both. So I would design the point combination around that scenario. Some people like shapes. I talk about triangle of power and figure 8 in my book, but there are others as well. The triangle of power is basically 3 needles in a triangle shape, but it's not one-dimensional. It's working very much through multiple dimensions. So you've got like do 20 and kidney 1, highest, lowest points in the body, they make a triangle shape and they energize energy through the whole body if it can, up and down. The figure 8 is a design that I've come up with, which again is in my book. So you can gain more access to that, but essentially it's looking at regulating your 5 spirits. So your Hun, your Po, your Yi, your Ji, and your Shen, and help to regulate energy up and down the body as well. So it also helps to regulate your Sanjiao, give all of your organs as well a chance to regulate themselves. So if some organs are excess, help to settle. If some are deficient, help to tonify. It's not the perfect treatment for everyone, but it's one that I've found over the years is very, very effective. You've got other designs as well, a plus or an asterisk or stars, squares, pentagons, hexagons. The Dr. Tan talks about bow ties. I can't think of that. Hourglass, those types of ones as well. I guess the idea is that the shape in itself, through like, I guess, sacred geometry or whatever term you like using, it's the point you've chosen that's doing a job, but it's also the shape itself has the ability to work on the function, work on the patient's complaint. It's certainly something that I'm still in my infancy with in regards to knowledge, but is something that I'm looking into more and more over the coming years. Also, I think it's important to treat the person, not the disease. And that's something that you're taught probably in the first semester of your studies, first year. Basically, it's pretty simple. You're treating the person, not the label that they give you, or it's not the label that you give them. So if they walk in and they complain about migraines or insomnia or whatever else, you still treat them as them. You don't treat the headache or the insomnia, because they're still a person and they can change from one treatment to the next. Even within the time frame that they're in your clinic for, they can change. So you treat them as them. And so that means you need to think for yourself. And so what it also does for me is this hypothetical sticky forehead label. So what it is that the patient comes in, they give you a series of signs and symptoms, you diagnose them as, say, liver qi stagnation, and then you pretend to have liver qi stagnation on their forehead to remind yourself of what you're constructing your point combination from. You do your treatment. When you take all the needles out, you take the sticky forehead label off. So the patient came in as David, you diagnose them to come up with your point combination, but then they leave again as David. So they never leave with their disease that we've labeled them as. Because if we do, then we're still treating the disease, not the person. because there's no guarantee they'll be the same label when they come in next time. So always treat the person, not the disease. That leads into, again, your ability to construct the point combination yourself. And that's pretty simple, really. If you're a chef, you design your own point combinations off your experience, off your learning, off point combinations you've been taught, and you tweak them based on your experience, or you just always do what you've always done, and it was something that someone else told you to do. So you're never really trying to be a better version of your acupuncture self. You're not feeling prompted to. And again, that's okay if you still get good results with what you do, but I just feel like you should always be someone that's proactively trying to better yourself. And to do that, you really need to have your own free will, free thinking. So your ability to be able to construct your own treatments. Okay, part 3 is looking at a range of different ways that you can construct your point combinations off diagnostics. So an example here is with spleen qi deficiency, that's a Zàng Fü pattern differentiation. And you'll see here, based on 3 different books, Giovanni's Foundations, Johnny Mack and Joel Penner's Zàng Fü book as well, and Jeremy Ross's Zàng Fü book. They have different series of points that they use based on the one Zàng Fü pattern. So depending on which one you prefer, or there's hundreds of other Zàng Fü pattern differentiation books out there. So whichever one that you use, if this is your way that you diagnose, you might have a whole other list of points there. So you can see that Ren 12 and bladder 20 and stomach 36 are across all 3. But other than that, there's some quite different ones that are listed there. So depending on which one you like, that's probably what you use. Or you can even tweak it based on your own clinical experience as well. Maybe it's 5 elements that you diagnose with. And if you diagnose with 5 elements, maybe you look at diagnosing them based on whether the patient has a Shang cycle issue, or a Ko cycle issue, or a Chang or a Wu cycle issue. And that would be then dictated by what point combination you would use. I've got 3 chapters on 5 elements in here that goes through those cycles and gives clinical examples of how you use them as well. Maybe it's musculoskeletal. So you might construct your point combination based on the etiology or cause of it. You might construct your point combination off the Western diagnosis. So they might have tennis elbow, and so you already have a series of needles that you would use for that diagnosis, as opposed to golfer's elbow, for example. Maybe you diagnose as B syndrome, blood stasis, that type of thing, in which case you might construct your point combination differently again. Or you use the local distal adjacent point combination. You might use corresponding or mirroring. So that's if it's the same example of an elbow, you might have right elbow problems, so you do left knee, for example. Acute or chronic might dictate what points you use. Your past clinical experience might dictate what points you use. Or a bias or preference towards what researchers said, what your authors that you like say, what your lecturers said. So it might be a range of all of those things, or it might be a few little things that you do that dictates what point combination you construct based on their musculoskeletal complaint. So in and around all of that's how you do it. Other options are you might do the Shanghan Lun, although that is very herb biased. You might construct around 6 divisions or 4 levels. You might construct off Dr. Tan or Master Tung. And again, you might construct your point combinations based off the root cause or the manifestations, or a combination of both. Again, lots of books have extra chapters on this information, so I'm not going into any extra detail for you. But again, it's just making you look at ways people are likely to construct their point combinations. Whichever one you sit in there, or if it's an other that's not listed, it's still what you do in order to construct your point combination. Apologies again about my dog. Now, how do I do this all? So that's all going to come up. So the main complaint's a big one for me. So as soon as the patient gives me a main complaint, points pop into my head, boop, 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 like little balloons with a name of a point written on it. They're not points I'll necessarily use, but they're points that start the process for me, mulling it around in my head. So for example, if it's a headache, even if they haven't told me where the headache is yet, if they just go, oh, I've got a headache, and of course I'd find out more about it. But straight away they say headache, and I'll go, okay, large intestine 4, small intestine 3, bladder 60, these types of things pop into my head, gallbladder 41. And from that, I've got to start. Or the person might have insomnia, and so I'm thinking heart 7, spleen 6, pericardium 6, yin tang do 20. It's not until they then expand out on the type of headache it is or what type of insomnia it is that might then cancel some points out, make other points even more prominent, or one point pops out and a new point comes in. The accompanying signs and symptoms are the next thing. So that's expanding on the main complaint and learning more about it. If it's the headaches, the nature, the intensity, the location, duration, onset, offset, radiates to, accompanying signs and symptoms, all these types of things. Does it feel better with pressure, worse with pressure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. For insomnia, it's what is that? Is it not being able to get to sleep? Is it getting to sleep okay, but waking lots of times at night? Is it getting to sleep okay? They stay asleep, and then around a certain time in the morning, they wake up and there's no more sleep. Do they get up to urinate multiple times at night? Each of those things give me a more specific idea about what's happening with that insomnia, which leads me closer to a diagnosis, which leads me to a list of points. So the example here is the headache is above one eye. So it's around here. They have stress, frustration, neck and shoulder tension. So now I'm starting to think, oh, maybe that's liver qi stagnation. So now my headache's points are a little bit more specific because I'm looking to treat the headache. Can I also treat stress, frustration, neck and shoulder tension with the one list of points? In that scenario, I'm probably still going to keep large intestine 4 because it does treat all types of headache. I'm going to potentially use gallbladder 20 because again, it will treat the one-sided headache, but it also treats stress, frustration, neck and shoulder tension. I'm probably going to do maybe a liver 3 or gallbladder 41 because they're going to help with the stress, the frustration, the neck and shoulder tension, and the headaches. So my points are now growing. I'm probably going to consider leaving out small intestine 3 and bladder 60, even though both of those would do the headache plus the neck and shoulder tension. Small intestine 3 actually can treat eyes, but it's probably not the best headache above one eye combination of points that I could use. Bladder 60 will, because it obviously starts around the eye. But again, is it going to do stress and frustration? Not so much. So it's looking at those points more. And then basically the Zàng Fü diagnosis kind of rounds it out for me. So again, same thing, the headache, stress, frustration, neck and shoulder tension gives me my diagnosis, which rounds out my points. And I kind of already talked about that. I might then include others. So I could include peri 6. I could include gallbladder 34. I could include liver 14 as the front move point for liver. Or I've already got a few gallbladder points, gallbladder 20, for example. Maybe I'll do gallbladder 14 because it's right where they complain about their headache. I guess it depends on whether they like pressure there or whether they don't. So if they don't like pressure there, I may not do gallbladder 14, but if they do like pressure there, I may use it. Liver chi stagnation doesn't automatically tell you whether that will feel better for pressure or worse for pressure. It's really dependent on various other factors. So that's sort of then how I'm designing my points. Then I've got points on the legs, the arms, the trunk, the head, the neck. And that's looking for point connections. So a lot of this I've probably already really discussed. So I'm listening to all of the things they're saying, and I'm looking at how all those points work together. And the good versus bad connections is something I will talk about shortly. But in that, again, I talked about it. Was bladder 60 and small intestine 3 really going to be the best points I could use in that previous example? Probably not, because it's not really going to look at all of the accompanying issues that the patient has. So could I be better served by going to some different points to round out the treatment? And that leads to sensible scattering of needles. Again, the points I gave you there for me is sensibly scattered. They're not all stacked in one spot. And it allowed for me to have energy moving through the entire body. It's for me, it's more dynamic. I spend time talking about this in the book, so I don't really have the time right now to be talking about it. And some examples of good versus bad scattering, we talked about that about half an hour ago. Good scattering is choosing points around the body that communicate with one another. You're not just randomly choosing points for the sake of picking a different limb. You still want them to combine and communicate with the points that are in other parts of the body. Because otherwise you might be better served just putting all the needles in one small space. Because if they at least are all communicating with one another, you might get a better outcome. So it's sensible scattering, looking for connections all the time. So the 8 to 16 needles for me was never really something I thought too much about until students started saying, why are you tending to give me needles in a treatment, or why you are encouraging me to stick to needles that are around about a dozen in the body? And I kind of went, oh, I do that, don't I? So then I looked at what I tend to the lower end and then the higher end. If students that I teach have a treatment that could work, that has less than 8 needles or more than 16, I'm probably still going to sign off on it, because if it could work, then I shouldn't be trying to force them into this 8 to 16 needle range, because it might turn out that their treatment would have been better than what I could have constructed. And so it's still that ability to allow students that free will if their treatment could work. And sometimes I will use more than 16 or less than 8 on my treatments as well. If someone's got a musculoskeletal complaint, maybe neck and shoulder and low back, then I'm probably every chance of using a little bit more than 16. I don't tend to use much less than 8. I feel like less than 8, you haven't really given the body enough information. And if you use more than 16, you're potentially giving the body too much information. And so both of those scenarios can cause drama, in that you are too draining maybe with over 16, or you aren't giving the body enough information to perform all of its functions if you use less than 8. Now, I've got a friend in Israel that uses 1 needle on every patient. It's not the same needle, but it's 1 needle for the diagnosis, and he gets great results. So again, I'm not going to say to him, oh, I really want you to get into that 8 to 16 needle range, because what he does works. So what he does works, what I do works, that's fine. Again, this is sort of how I construct treatments, and it really makes sense for me to do that anyway, because when I'm constructing, hundreds of treatments in this book, it really gives you a sense of consistency across that as well. I've got some acupuncturists that are friends, and some that I've gone to over the years that have done 30 plus needles, and again, still get great results. So it's really up to you. If you're really trying to refine your treatments down and want a place to kind of start, maybe this is where you start. You look between 8 to 16 and you try to be really, really specific with the needle choices that you use. It's one suggestion. Bilateral needling is something that I'm a big fan of. If you've got two of the point, I think that using both almost gives you more than double the effect. That's my personal view. I did try unilateral needling for a few years on and off, and I just didn't really feel like I got the same results that the bilateral needling gave me. As already stated, you might be different and you might do unilateral needling and get wonderful results. And again, that's fine. I had a wonderful co-lecturer. He was actually the boss at Endeavour College for a number of years, called Rod Hinks. Brilliant man, really, really fascinating. And he was a unilateral needler and he got wonderful results, and he encouraged that in his students in the clinic, and they got good results too. And it was interesting because I did one clinic with him, or I did a few actually with him, but the students would get encouraged to do bilateral needling from me and unilateral from Rod, and both sets of students were getting good results. So I guess in the end, that was a good experience for me to see how good unilateral needling can be. And so I am a fan of it in the fact that it can be very effective. Personally, I'm still sticking to bilateral needling from my own clinical experience. Patient positioning, I don't really like flipping patients partway through a treatment. I feel like they're just starting to relax, and then you come in and you go, hey, okay, take the needles out, right, roll over, you put the needles in again. The patient was just relaxing, and I've come back in and jarred them and they're up again, and then they don't tend to relax that second time. So if I really want to flip a patient, I will almost always do it the next treatment, unless they really, really do need a flip in the one treatment, in which case I will. But almost always I will avoid that. Now, in my book there, you will have some treatments that have a face up and face down in the one treatment, and sometimes you won't. And it's not full of my point combinations. There are a lot of point combinations in there that are referenced from classical texts, and they may have a face up and face down option. And I'll talk about that scenario, and it's fine. Again, if you like flipping patients and you get good results, then that's fine. But what it does mean is that sometimes I'll have points that are popping around in my head, and then I get to the point of constructing my point combination and some have to be left out. And again, I'm okay with that because I can always find another point on the front or the back that can be a suitable replacement. Two perfect examples of that are Ren 4 and Ren 6. So Guan Yuan Ren 4, Qi Hai Ren 6. They are brilliant, brilliant points. And if I've got the patient face down and I wanted to use them, well, I've chosen not to. But can I find a suitable replacement? Well, as it turns out, I can, because Guan Yuan Ren 4 has a back shu point, Guan Yuan Shu. So it's Ren 4, which is bladder 26. So bladder 26 is Guan Yuan Shu. So if they're face down, I can still do Ren 4 on the back. And Qi Hai Ren 6 has Qi Hai Shu, which is bladder 24. So again, if I really wanted to do Ren 6 and they're face down, I could do bladder 24. So these are just two examples of where I can easily sub out a point and bring in another one that's going to have a similar effect. And there's examples of that all over the place. Maybe they don't have a similar name, but they have a similar function. What order do I needle points? Talked about this before. I'm not too worried unless I work on the 8 extras, in which case then I do the opening points, both bilateral, then both coupled, and then a point on the vessel. And then after that, whatever, doesn't really matter. But I really want to give the body specific information that we're working on that vessel today. So the opening point bilateral, then the coupled point bilateral, and then at least 1 point on that vessel. So if it's, say, Renmai, I would do the lung 7 bilateral, then kidney 6 bilateral, and then the Ren points. And then if I need any other points, they go in later. If I'm not doing the 8 extras, I tend to just put the points in however it just seems to work. Now, there are some points that are more likely to hurt than others, and I tend to leave them until last. I did for a couple of years try and use them first so they're out of the way, but what tended to happen was the patient then thought all the needles were going to hurt, so they stayed all agitated right through the treatment. So from experience, again, there are some points that just are more likely to hurt no matter how good you are at needling. A good example of that is kidney 1, heart 8, pericardium 8. They're more likely to hurt than points like, say, large intestine 11 or Ren 12. They just are. So I tend to leave them till the end. And I tend to also do feet or face towards the end as well. Even though there are a lot of points on the face and on the head that actually don't hurt, there are some that do or can. People just are a bit funny about needles in the face and the head. So again, tend to leave those towards the end. And then the feet, they have a tendency to hurt more than hurt less. They don't always, and there's plenty on the feet that don't, but there is a chance they will. And so I tend to leave them till towards the end or at the end. And there's a second reason. Touching the feet and you're not finished needling, you probably really need to go and wash your hands again before you continue with the rest of your needling. And that is just time wasted. I just think that you're better off just doing them at the end, so then you can just wash your hands at the end. Needle retention time, once all the needles are in, it's like the time starts then, because the combination is what matters. So once all the needles are in, they're all humming, they're all talking to one another, and then the clock starts. And it could be anything from 20 to 40 minutes, depending on the patient, depending on the diagnosis, depending on their age, constitution, a range of things. If they're young, it might only be up to 8 needles and 20 minutes. If they're elderly and quite sick, again, might be down more towards the 8 needles and only 20 minutes. If it's musculoskeletal and there's a lot going on, I might do, around the 16 needle mark, and I might leave the needles in for 30 to 40 minutes, especially if I also incorporate things like moxa, electro, these types of things. If the person's robust and I think that their constitution can handle it, then I might go for a little bit longer. So that's kind of how that works. I write the needle number down. Seems like such a simple thing, but that stops you forgetting the needles that might be hidden away. So write the needle number down. I write down all the needle names on the patient's clinic file, and then I'll write 13 points circled, for example. And then I make sure that I took the 13 out when I finish. Because if they're face down, I can still get to, say, liver 3, for example, by propping the ankles up, but then I can't see that needle. So if I just go off site, I might forget that liver 3 is even in there. So again, that's an example of where, or if they're face up, I can do gallbladder 20, like transverse, and they can lay back down on the pillow and that needle can stay in there. But again, I don't see it when it's time to take the needles out. So write the number down, make sure you took that number out. I like explaining stuff to the patient. As you explain something to a person, they start visualizing it. As they start visualizing it, the body starts doing those things, if it can. It also helps them understand what it is that we do, because it is kind of weird. And that gives them a better chance that if they're at a party or a barbecue and you're not there, they might be saying, oh, I had this acupuncture treatment this week. It was really interesting. And then their friend says, what is acupuncture? How does that work? What did they do? They're more of a chance of being able to explain it to that person, so that we get better chance of referrals. It gives people a sense of a better understanding, rather than go, oh, I don't know. I have no idea. It's all tree hug and hippie crap as far as I'm concerned, but it works. These are not the things that you want people saying about your career. So giving them a bit of information actually helps them when they get out into the world to help to promote acupuncture and promote you. I expect results. As a result of that, I have no doubts my patients will improve, and that leads into my communication with them where they get that sense as well. And so there's definitely an improvement there. I have no doubts. My favorite channel is the Renmai because you can get to every single organ using the Ren. From there, I have distal points, of course, and I don't always do the opening and couple points on the Ren. I can just pick Ren points and it will still treat what I'm targeting. But I absolutely love the Ren channel in terms of what its ability to treat. We can get right at organs, and then the point combination is rounded out by appropriate distal points. My favorite points otherwise, and it's hard to narrow down to 10. This was an exercise that my students encouraged me to do. They said, can you give us your top 50? And then I did that, and they said, oh, that's too many. Can you give us a top 10? Oh, yeah, what about a top 5 or your favorite? So from that process, it kind of narrowed down. And in my book, I do have a top 50, top 10, top 5, my favorite. And this is the top 10 currently for me. And they will do a lot of different things, which allows me to use at least 1 or 2 of these in a lot of treatments that I do. Sometimes I won't use any of them, but more often than not, at least one of these or multiple will be included in my point combination. Probably not too many surprises there, really. Heart 7, large intestine 4, spleen 6, liver 3, kidney 3, stomach 36. I mean, goodness. Gallbladder 20, Ren 17, Do 20, Yin Tang. Yeah, I don't think there's too many surprises there. Some that you probably don't have in your top 10, I would imagine. So a point like Do 20 is quite a interesting point in that not everyone agrees with what it does. So that can often have it only used on very rare occasions. But I think a lot of those you're probably not too surprised to see. So in terms of summaries of what we've sort of talked about, basically a good acupuncture point combination is points on multiple channels traveling in different directions. They are sensibly scattered. They have vital substances that are then traveling to organs and potentially to extremities. They have a single-minded purpose, or they work on lots of different things in the treatment, but still, more often than not, lots of the points are talking to one another. And it targets and enhances relevant functions of each point, which is a bit like the previous one, that we're actually getting the points to do the things that we need them to do, as opposed to the chi going, what is it I have to do? This point does so many things. So bad acupuncture point combinations are typically ones that don't adhere to that previous principle. In my mind, one that doesn't include local and distal. But again, if that's not your approach, that's fine. It's a personal view. And that the APC or point combination doesn't work together, and in fact, it opposes. So in that instance, you might have too many points kind of trying to do too many things, or in fact, are trying to do the opposite things, which isn't always bad. But if they're trying to do completely opposite things, that's when you can lead to lots of problems. So if someone's deficient, but maybe they have a stagnant condition, if you do try and do too much within that space, you might find that neither of them are really all that effective, or that you create dramas, or that maybe that's not the best example. What about Giovanni talks about when you expel an external pathogenic factor, if you use the wrong points, it will clear out the pathogen, but it'll also make your Wei Qi even weaker. Or conversely, you have points to tonify Wei Qi, but they're not the right points, and so you tonify the pathogen at the same time. So in those instances, your point combinations need to be more refined. All right, we're wrapping up now, which will leave some time for questions, which again, you can email me, and I'll give you my email address as well. So your additional, this will come in here now. So let's just keep moving. So my Facebook has a link there. So that's, you just click on that and that gives you access to the best Facebook page for me. It talks about where I'm going to be once COVID again sort of opens up the world. I'm babbling here. Get my sense of thought back. I'm almost finished. So that's the best one to be Facebook friends with, because it'll give you my whereabouts and it'll give you links to my blog. It'll give you, when I've written something, it'll give you access to a lot more stuff that's relevant to this Chinese medicine side of things. That's my best email address, DAHARTMANN, number 8 @gmail.com. That's my blog. Has lots of stuff in it. It's not just Chinese medicine. There's a range of history, philosophy topics in there as well. It's all free. I have the 2 books, as I said, obviously the Point Combo book, and I also have the Acupoint Dictionary. The Point Dictionary just gives you a list of points. So over 1,000 disorders are in it, A to Z. You look up the disorder, it has the points. Doesn't tell you why, but just lists it. It's very good clinically for you. If you're struggling to round out your point combination, you go, oh, I'll look up David's book. You look it up, it's got the list of points. It's referenced so you can find out why potentially those point combinations were used, or at least find a different place that I had found that information. That's the 2 books there. I have a range of online courses, and these are growing all the time. So I have some with Healthy Seminars, TCM Academy, eLotus, China books. I'm about to do some with Singing Dragon. And when my website is up and running, I will be doing some on there as well. So lots of places to access my content and different stuff at these different businesses and as well. The weekly video posts that I'm going to do up will be free, and they will be short 5-minute ones that snapshot. So the point combo thing will be choosing a point combination and for 5 minutes just talking about how that works together. And that's going to start, I'm assuming, towards the end of 2020. And once I've got my website, that'll all go on there too, but it'll also be something that you can access via social media. And if you've got my Facebook friendship there, you will have access to that every week as well. I will start doing a first aid with tuning forks as well, which is something that's I've been exploring over the last 5-6 years. And then also fast philosophy. I find philosophy fascinating and I love little quotes. And so I was planning on doing little 5-minute videos on a quote, who said it, a quick historical view of that person, which gives us a sense of why they said what they said, and my view of what I think it means. And these will basically come out every week or so, little 5-minute recordings for you that are free. And what that'll lead into is some monthly Q&A. So I'll start doing hour-long attendance options for you to come and ask me questions about different questions that you might have about acupuncture point combinations, the tuning forks, the philosophy, that sort of thing. And I have the website under construction. Keen to keep, obviously staying in contact with a lot of you, and I'll continue to be producing content all the time. There's only a few references in this particular set of slides, but I have a huge amount of references from both books that I've written that I've accessed in order to help me with the construction of those books. So maybe I'll put back here. So that's the, again, email address if you want to get in contact with me, and we can move forward from there. Thank you very, very much for watching. Again, if you have any questions, please let me know. You can again email me at dahartmann8@gmail.com or friend me at that Facebook site. Again, please feel free to jump onto my blog anytime you want. Otherwise, it's been wonderful talking to you today, and I wish you all the best in your acupuncture careers moving forward. So thank you very much.